Welcome everyone to this third virtual roadshow for Agroecology-TRANSECT. Tim's going to be introducing the project in a second. So
yeah, thanks, Anna, and I'll let you control the slides if that's all right. We have a couple of slides just to introduce the Agroecology-TRANSECT project for anyone that's joining us for the first time. Our kind of mission statement, as it were, for this project is to lay the groundwork for agroecology as the future of farming by learning, engaging, and inspiring action. And I should probably start by saying Agroecology-TRANSECT is a 4-year Horizon Europe funded project that involves 11 innovation hubs and many different partners around Europe. And it is coming to the end of the project now. So we end in August next year, 2026, and it's a really exciting time within the project because a lot of the work is now kind of coming to the surface, and we're seeing some really interesting results from the research that's happened and from the innovation hubs. So we're now able to hold events like this and share some of that with you and with policymakers, and to kind of go towards our aim of scaling up and scaling out agroecology across Europe. Is there another slide? So as I said, it's a pan-European project, Horizon project, and we've said we know that farming can work in a way that benefits everyone, industry, communities, and the environment. It can be regenerative, mitigate climate change, and improve biodiversity, and we call this type of farming agroecology. An important solution lies in farming systems that embrace the principles of agroecology that build on natural processes, ecological principles, and the socio-ecological feedbacks that foster these principles. And I've talked about our goal already. And like I say, now is the time for us as a project to come together and share those with each other, but also with the wider world. So it's an exciting time. I've talked about our innovation hubs already. So we can go on to the next slide. Bit more on the innovation hubs, which you'll hear from 2 of them today. They were existing networks of already doing things in an agroecological way, and we call them multi-actor hubs, and they're totally key to this project in helping us learn and share knowledge that we find and capture as we kind of advance our understanding of the potential of agroecology to make those change, those 3 key pillars, which are kind of climate change, socioeconomic resilience, and biodiversity. So we've already had a virtual roadshow on biodiversity. If anyone's really interested, you can go back on our YouTube channel and see that. I think because of time, we might skip this slide, Anna, if that's all right. And I think this slide is just a beautiful picture as a way of
it's a beautiful picture
up.
to make sure that you don't keep on talking for hours and that people actually can get into the topic that we really want to talk about today, which is policy. And again, you saw how busy our presentations are. So I just want to make sure before we go, we wanted to start the whole presentation. You're going to be hearing a lot of technical information that's absolutely key to make change happen. But before doing that, we wanted to make sure to share with you a short video we created with the team in our last meeting, and that we think frames really well what we're gonna be talking about today.
Across Europe, the Agroecology-TRANSECT project has brought together 11 hubs of researchers, farmers, and civil society groups to understand how farming can work with nature rather than against it. After 3 years of research, data gathering, and collaboration, the many voices across the project have come together to combine their insights in a call for policies that enable real transitions towards agroecology.
I think we need to really think about what are agricultural and food systems for? What are they about? Are they about making money? Are they about profitability? Or are they about feeding people in a fair, healthy, and sustainable way?
Our results clearly indicate the need to reform the common agricultural policy, which still rewards intensive systems and disadvantages agroecological farmers.
They just don't manage. They don't manage to be as competitive as other very intensive approaches. They don't manage to get enough subsidies. They don't get enough support.
Farmers who protect soils, restore biodiversity, and reduce emissions need policies that recognize and reward those public goods.
Policymakers need to be much more ambitious in their plans for how the CAP looks. There's lots of good stuff in there, but it's not ambitious enough. We need to be more revolutionary with how we see agriculture and agricultural transformation.
The ramification really of not acting is, as human society, we don't have a future.
But agricultural policy alone isn't enough.
Currently, what is really missing is food policy. We don't have solutions for consumers, for supermarkets, for other actors in the value chain. And what is really necessary is to think of the holistic issue of what agroecology is. It's not just the producers, it's not just consumers, but it's about the sustainability of agri-food systems.
Aligning CAP reform with the nature restoration law within a coherent food policy can deliver benefits for farmers, society, and the environment.
I think our food system more tries to ignore nature and cannot, because we're dependent on nature, on a functioning nature.
You cannot produce on a dead land. You can produce when there's droughts and uncertainty about what is the next weather event going to do to your agriculture.
Diverse nature-based farming can build resilience and help secure Europe's farming future.
If we really want to solve the problem for rural areas and poor farmers, we need to invest more in rural areas. And that means investing in those farmers that need help to do the right thing.
It's not simple. Policymakers usually like simple messages, but they need to embrace the complexity of it and put the effort in to understand the science behind it, to understand the social aspects of it, to set a framework that enables everybody to thrive.
We'll share a link to the chat so you can go and watch that and share that with your colleagues and friends, because it really is a beautiful film. And while you're at it, if you look at our YouTube, there's several films on there that we've made, one particularly on biodiversity, which just kind of captures the essence of some of our innovation hubs and agroecology across Europe through that lens. But we're here to talk about policy and food and farming policy, and the way we're going to do that first is hear from the main authors of the two policy briefs that we have just published as a project. They were taken and presented in Brussels last week, I think, and had a really Adrien and Guy can talk more, but had a really good reception there. And we're lucky enough to have Adrien here, so I will introduce him. He leads a work package of this project and some work particularly looking at the barriers and levers to the expansion of agroecology in Europe, and I will leave him to explain what it is and the policy brief because he's the expert. But thanks for joining us from Belgium yourself. So yes, you have the floor, Adrien, please.
Thank you. Exactly, as you mentioned, Adrien Sortebroeks from Belgium and working in a public research center, and so here in the Agroecology-TRANSECT project. As Tim mentioned here, the idea is that I'll show you results that we gathered to build one of our two policy brief that we have currently, and which is about the unlocking the transition through looking at the barriers. So what block the initiative in transition and the levels, so maybe things that help them. And first, a disclaimer. Does it work? I thought I had the control, but apparently not fully. If you can pass the slide, please. Yes, exactly. A first disclaimer, just before us, three exactly there. There is three heads, which are the colleagues. So it's not only my work, it's the work of three of us that we gathered here in the policy brief. And so there were two approaches here in the policy brief. You can pass the next slide. The first approach, which is related to a survey. So it was Marie-Hélène Delove who built a survey thanks to a literature review on what may help or what may block the different initiative in the transition. And really the idea was try to gather all those results together from a broad perspective. And at the end, thanks to this survey, we gathered 89 answers. We can go to the next slide. And on those 89 answers, we can see that those are really spread across Europe. The idea was really to gather, so each of these dots is one answer, one initiative that answered the survey. Thanks to this, we really try to have a broad view on agroecological transition in European Union. We can go to the next slide. And then our second approach was through interview, because with the survey, you can't ask broad questions, you can't have a broader discussion, and maybe also go deeper in those aspects. And so we had those interviews, which were semi-directed interviews, and we can pass it. Yes, we are then with at the end 22 initiatives which answered and where we had those interviews, and sometimes we had like 2 or 3 interviews, but sometimes to 5 or 7, and it was interviews with farmers, with not with policymakers, with farmers, with SMEs, with also people that are around the farmers, as it can be administration, very a broad set of people. And the idea was really to deepen this question of what helped them or what blocked them in their transition. And so in those 22 initiatives, which are with the green circle, those are the 11 innovation hubs that we already mentioned in the introduction, but also 11 other initiatives really trying to have a broader spectrum of answers here in this interview. And so we did those, and at the end we really tried to gather and to see what came not only once, but really at the different initiatives that we interviewed. And that's what I will bring in the next slide, which are the key barriers that were first identified. So really what maybe were blockers to their transition, to their development, to make them running their own initiative. And the first one, which we highlight here, is the awareness gap. So really the different stakeholders of those initiatives feel that from the farmer perspective, but also the consumer or the policymaker, there was really misunderstanding or not enough awareness of the global challenges. And it was also enhanced by the policy shifts that we can see at some period and into politics, for instance, now. A second key barrier, is the policy inconsistency related to the first one, more to the policy there. They felt that they feel that there is really an inconsistency from each of those different levels, so EU, national, sometimes regional or local, and also the articulation between those, and especially when it's policy related to agroecology. The next one is the unsustainable subsidies and subsidy distribution. Not only is the fact that those subsidies themselves are not sustainable in the way they are given, but it's also really related to the distribution of those, where the farmers, and especially the small-scale farmers, which were really deep into agroecology, felt that the distribution was not fair for all the efforts that they made. Can go to the next slide. Another aspect was the market and regulatory challenges. And really what was missing here is the lack of adapted markets, because those products have different characteristics sometimes in terms of scale, in terms of where they are produced, in terms of the quality that they have. And so sometimes the feeling that there was an unfair competition also for imported products. And so several times comes along in the interviews the Mercosur case that we know today, and that is under discussion at European level. Another aspect was really the attractiveness of the rural sector and of the infrastructure themselves. And sometimes it was really not for all of them, but for several times it was also a feeling of disconnection from the city or from the markets that exist, but that may be far away. There was, due to this lack of infrastructure for all those farmers in agroecology. Another aspect is the critical shortage of labor, something really coming again and again, especially in the Mediterranean initiative, which was really driven by this low attractiveness to the farming job. And so even the farmers themselves told to their child to not do their job because it's something difficult and there is a low attractiveness to it. And so it's really bring a labor shortage. A last set of key barriers, here more related to the technological and machinery. Sometimes some initiative really at the necessity of having especially adapted machinery and which was not always available or too expensive. And so also the question of why having not a push for two hands machinery or shared machinery, etc., which is also a good opportunity for agroecological practices. Another aspect was the lack of participatory research and a co-creation of knowledge. And of course, that's something that we are trying to do here in the project with the Innovation Hub and with all those initiatives. And so it's really something that try to build context-specific, systemic, and long-term solutions for the agricultural sector as a whole. And last but not least, the climate uncertainties. And a farmer specifically said that for him, even if we find practices that works, he is not certain that it will work in the futures. And so it makes also a link for our research. If we have good results, perfect. But if the climate change it can bring uncertainties, if it still will be able to work in the future. So something very important. And so that was really for the key barriers. So really what's blocked them, but not only were we looking at that, but also what helped them and what were maybe solution to that. And so here really also with colleagues that I thanks. So here Guy and Sebastian, for instance, that help us in translating those levers or those problems into solutions. We try to build some policy recommendations, and that was also the aim of this policy brief, of course. First one is, of course, related to this lack of awareness. Well, it seems logical, but to again raise awareness more and more and at all levels. So it's really important, and that's really the role of all those levels to bring awareness. And that's a key one, of course. Develop consistent and long-term supportive policies, which needs to be really long-term and not only a call of project for 1 year or 2 years, but really help them. And it's related to the next one, which is related to the cost of transition. Because, of course, making those transitions, changing a system for a farmer or for SME or for someone working in the agricultural sector, bring costs because you change, and so supporting it is very a key element to have this transition. A lot of farmers are happy to make this transition if they have the enough support. The next one is to develop, of course, those fair and profitable markets. And so again, this question on how fair is the market with the globalized market, etc. So for those specific agroecological products that not only brings food, but a lot of other positive aspects. And hence also the labor condition and attract really the young generation because it's required. The numbers, and it was something really widespread into Europe, show that the farmer population is older and older. Invest in infrastructure and technology. As I mentioned, we need really those design for agroecological production. And the last one, to really promote, and that's what we aim to do here, promote the participatory and transdisciplinary research, not only as beautiful words, but really because the farmers themselves thought that sometimes the solution promoted by the research is not contextually related to the context. So that's really something that is required so that they can use them and that they are realistic. And so that was it for the key barriers from one side. So really having in mind that something blocked them, but also trying to bring those into a solution. Thank you for your attention and happy to answer your question after. But I think that here we are going to listen to Stephen first.
Great. Thanks, Adrien, for that whistle-stop tour through your policy brief, which is available. The published policy brief is available on our website. I think we've shared a link in the chat already. And just to remind people, if they have a question for Adrien or anyone on the panel today, pop it in the Q&A, the question and answer tab, and we'll come to it. And we'll have questions for Adrien and for Stephen. We'll hear from Stephen first, but any questions on the policy briefs, we can take some after we hear from Stephen. Stephen Leithauser is a researcher based in the Netherlands, and he was the principal author of the second policy brief we're looking at today, which is titled Producing Actionable Knowledge for Transformative Change. And again, I think I'll hand the floor to you, Stephen, to explain who you are and what you've done to pull together this policy brief for us.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. As Tim mentioned, my name is Stephen Leithauser. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Wageningen University in the Farming Systems Ecology Group. And what we're going to do here in this policy brief, we actually pick up right on the last point that Adrian made in the policy recommendations about promoting participatory and transdisciplinary research. So we really are looking at the type of research that we do in the project and some of the impacts, potentials, and challenges in that research and how policy can better support impacts. Let's see if I can control here. It looks like I can control the slide. So yeah, transdisciplinary research is increasingly seen as a lever for transformative change amidst all these societal challenges that we're facing. And in the EU, it's used more and more to promote and develop environmentally safe and socially just agri-food systems. But what is exactly transdisciplinary research? Basically, we can think of it as an umbrella term for integrating scientific and practical or experiential knowledge. So bringing, you could say, if we can click again, bringing science into society and bringing society into science. So engaging farmers and other stakeholders with scientists, having them part of the research process as much as possible to define questions, methods, etc. And research here is done with and for the affected stakeholders. So the people who are ultimately the end users are part of the process to generate knowledge that's not only generic and scientific, but also actionable. So focused on creating contextual, relevant, and useful knowledge and geared towards making interventions into practice. And in Europe, again, this is seen as a lever or a big driver of transformative change, and it has what we could call great expectations. Oh yeah. So yeah, what is it expected to do in Europe? It's expected to help accelerate and navigate necessary transitions, to deploy and demonstrate de-risk solutions, and to engage citizens in the processes of social innovation to solve these big challenges. So we can say there, again, is great expectations. If we could click again. Great expectations, but also many challenges to this process. So we can go to the next slide. And in Agroecology-TRANSECT, we address these challenges of transdisciplinary projects in a specific way. We take a learning-oriented approach called co-innovation. And that co-innovation approach has a few aims. First, if we can click again, create a transformative learning process. So we bring everyone in the project into this reflective learning process where we focus on, are we doing the right things, but also are we doing things right, to kind of look at our mission for how we contribute to agroecology transformation and to adjust that on the go. And we also, again, aim to foster development of actionable knowledge that is contextually relevant and useful to actors as they work towards agroecology. And how do we do that? Real briefly here, we set up this project learning cycle, which takes place on a yearly basis. And that involves moments of, if you could click again, action. So we have people developing action plans and then carrying those out on a yearly basis. We follow that up with observing the effects of these actions and whether or not they're contributing to the effects that we want. And then finally, at the end of the year, we reflect on and analyze how these action plans have contributed to the goals and aims that we want and whether or not we need to make adjustments. So we've done this yearly learning cycle now 3 times. And this policy brief, what it's based on is an evaluation of this approach, which is also part of the co-innovation approach to evaluate effectiveness and the mechanisms driving the outcomes in the approach, and to provide guidance not only to the innovation hubs as we go along, but also to project governance in the future and ultimately to research policy, which is what we do here. So I'm going to highlight now some lessons that we learned from this evaluation. So first, we saw that the learning cycle activities, we've now undergone 3 of these yearly learning cycles. What they've done is they've created space for people to step out of their daily grind and sort of short-term thinking to reflect on the bigger picture. This has led to learning and some strategy adjustments for innovation hubs. So that's a real positive aspect that we've observed. And next, we've noticed that the project has provided actionable knowledge for innovation hubs. Also, maybe less expected was that resources and the legitimacy just from being associated with the project, so being recognized as a partner in the Agroecology-TRANSECT project, these were big drivers for innovation hubs to develop their technical solutions and also to make changes in networks and institutions. So that's another positive. But finally, we saw that barriers in research policy and also in the wider context of agri-food policy that Adrian had already touched on there, that limited the extent not only of the actionable knowledge that was able to be produced, but also the extent of transformative change for the actionable knowledge that was produced. And just to highlight here real quickly, if we could click one more time here, some of these barriers. First, for research, there's misaligned incentives for transdisciplinary research. So transdisciplinary research and producing actionable knowledge is very time intensive. It requires building trust. It requires deep engagement with societal actors. While on the other hand, researchers are still sort of in this rat race where we're producing metrics, rapidly quantifiable outputs. So we need to publish papers. We need to get the next grant. These are all competing for our time, and there's not really a lot of ways to valorize this transdisciplinary research yet for researchers. And finally, as Adrian has already discussed, the agri-food policy, or the lack of a food policy, I guess, and the lack of coherent and supportive food policies have limited the widespread adoption of transformative practices. So while farmers can accommodate some agroecology, it's not really transforming the way that they farm and the way they bring their products to market, the way value chains work. So if we could get the last point here, is that transdisciplinary efforts for actionable knowledge within an unchanged policy environment, it basically runs the risk of reproducing the status quo rather than transforming it. So that's why we need policy change in order to contribute to these original goals that we had talked about, where transdisciplinary research is a driver of a transformative change to address societal challenges. And now we'll move on to some of the recommendations. So first, there is already funding for transdisciplinary research, but what we need is better funding of transdisciplinary research. Could you please click there? So yeah, what that means is longer term funding. So allow this time for building trust and social capital, and also ensuring the fit of project partners. So ensuring that individuals are a fit and that institutions that they work within are a fit for the project mission as a whole. And also more allowing emergent changes. So the less bureaucracy for making changes, it's very difficult at this point, and it doesn't allow for a lot of the adaptability that we could have employed from the learning that we've done. So this move from planning and then doing with very strict and rigid contractual obligations to planning by doing and enabling more adaptation. And for the next one, providing frameworks for transformative and inclusive research. So we should better enable actors who are engaged in transformative change processes, and particularly civil society and community initiatives that are already maybe having more capacity to innovate and circumvent some of the lock-ins that we're experiencing more in the mainstream. And this can be done with allowing these actors to participate as project partners and maybe reducing some of the administrative hurdles that are there now for them. So create opportunities to compensate these actors for their participation, because now a lot of them are doing it in their free time or as volunteers. And there's one more point, if we could click again. And prioritize a focus not only on technical solutions, but also on, how do we devote this innovative, creative capacity to changing some of these policy and market frameworks. So not only technical innovation, but political innovation, institutional innovation, governance and economic innovation. So explore and experiment with alternative models that we see out there, again, in these community and civil society groups more often. And then the last recommendation, so really just linking research with policy. There's a lot of research going towards sustainability over the last decades, but we don't see a lot of things changing as a result. So just in a broader sense, link these research results with the broader policy agendas, not only in agriculture, but trade, industrial policy, energy, and use these results to make the difficult decisions that are necessary to address bigger challenges. And this should enable researchers to focus on acting as what we call boundary spanners to bridge the science policy society divides, not only focus on publishing papers and getting the next grant, but to support them in engaging in these complex processes. Finally, establish mechanisms to integrate scientists and research institutes into decision-making processes. And I think that also includes a way to offer transparency about how science informs or can inform policy decisions. So that is all I have for the recommendations. And I look forward to questions and discussion.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Stephen. Really interesting insight into your policy brief and your kind of work on the project, working with the Innovation Hubs too. There's a little bit of time for questions now about these two policy briefs, which are available on our website. They haven't been flying into the Q&A platform just yet, so feel free to put them in, and we can also take them later on. If anyone on the panel has questions for Stephen and Adrian at this point, you're welcome. I've got a couple that have come up in the meantime, which I would like to kind of put to them, but it's all about hearing from everyone who's on the call. So please do chuck any questions in. Adrian, your work on barriers and levers and your kind of recommendations based on those findings. And if anyone's interested more, there is a brilliant roadshow that we did looking at the barriers and levers to agroecology more generally, where we take a deep dive into that. I'm aware there's quite a lot of barriers that came up in your presentation. Are there any that stand out particularly for you in the policy context that could be a kind of like I was going to say a quick win, but like something that feels like a real priority at any European level, I guess, that could really make a big difference to unlocking this kind of transition or change towards agroecology?
Mm-hmm. I guess there are really ones that are key. And again, this is really based on the 22 initiative that we interviewed. It's not really my personal position. It's really trying to raise their voice. The question of the labor is really something important, and maybe I didn't mention because it's not only in agroecology, it's the whole agricultural sector, and not only in the agricultural sector, is in the whole industry and even other sectors that we feel this labor shortage. But what is maybe special here is that with agroecology, there are some models of agroecological farms that are really based on labor-intensive farms and really knowledge-intensive intensive farms. And so compare it to the others, which are maybe more based on machinery intensive or even energy input intensive. Here really in agroecology, the idea is to have more people and more knowledge. And so this need of people and of knowledge is really something that is a key blockers for a lot of those initiatives. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the awareness is also important. And one aspect that's really come, I'm an agronomist, and so at first glance, we can think that it's a problem of which type of practices that we use, but at the end, it really came along also that the problem is how the people are aware of those problems and how do they consider it and do they make in their own perception this transition and in their own head this transition and this realization that there are some bigger movement and that some systems that are applied can help them in their own problem. And so that's really something important, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. I think Stephen's got his hand up, so I imagine might want to follow on from that, Stephen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate you raising the question of labor. I think that's a really important point that doesn't often get highlighted. I think a lot of the last paradigm we've had is focused on labor saving. And maybe we also need to think more about energy saving, which often requires more labor. But I wonder also if another big sort of elephant in the room came up at all in the barriers, which is about land and access to land and tenure and the terms of that in terms of, who's defining how we need to farm based on how we access the land. Is that something that came up?
Yes, I would say it's something that not came in all the different initiatives that we interviewed, but in some specific, yes, it was really a key issue, and it also because some agroecological initiatives are really pushed by association or by even research, etc. So they don't often rely on this problem currently because there are some maybe I would say kind of in a specific framework. But for the others, which were really more grounded into initiative from farmers directly, yes, it was a huge problem. And again, there is this question of the markets and of which room we leave to those farmers in terms of competition for land, etc. And something that's really came along also is the room, even not only for agroecology but for agriculture. The question of how much the society accept to spend money into agriculture, and when we see how much and that's not based on the interview but more on results, on research results. When we look at how much the people pay for their food, which is always less and less from the money they gather from their I would say from their income, it's also part of this problem. I said that guy wants to say something.
Sorry, Guy. Yeah, Guy has his hand up. Carla's also asking questions in the chat, so we'll hear from Guy, and then Carla, maybe you could ask your question in person, and then we'll move on, I think, to the next section if no more questions from the floor. Guy.
Yes, I wanted to actually link the 2 or 3 statements with each other, because it's very interesting that we're talking about lack of knowledge when there have been projects and research for tens of years on this topic. And the fact that there's lack of knowledge is not because people are not educated, but because there's a fragmentation of this knowledge. And this is a problem of the supporting system from a policy perspective. I mean, every member state is obliged to give farm advisory services to farmers, and they are doing that. So the fact that there's no knowledge indicates that the member states are not investing in delivering the knowledge which exists already to the farmers needing that. And so that's one issue which relates again to the lack of incentive system. And basically that's one side of the problem, and the other side of the problem is a set of disincentives where we are hearing about simplification, but actually when you're trying to transit into agroecological or environmentally friendly farming, you encounter more and more controls and sanctions and problems. So in fact, the problem of labor is also because people don't want to work in that and lack the support in order to do that. So there are several issues which are actually linked to each other. And we will come back to that also in the 2 presentations of Sebastian and myself. But it's interesting to realize that it's not that we are lacking knowledge and we need more research to know what needs to be done, but rather the knowledge is somehow not integrated into the work and the transition that is necessary.
Yes, thank you. Tim, we cannot hear you, but that's
Sorry.
because you.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yes, yeah, Guy, really good point. And perhaps the challenge is bringing that together, that knowledge, and sharing it, which is actually something that Anna does on another project called Attractis, which is probably another webinar. But Carla had a question for Stephen, I think. So if we go to Guadeloupe, and then we'll move on.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned, Stephen, in your presentation that there's a need to enable more flexibility in the way research is organized and evaluated in order to enable transdisciplinary research to develop and take the time to develop. Do you know if there's a mechanism that allows this, organization the way to be changed already, or to be discussed at least? And also, I was wondering whether this whether this is linked to a question of scale of the project. Maybe smaller projects have more flexibility than bigger projects.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. That's a really good question. So I would say there's two stages where there could be more flexibility. And the first would be selecting of the project partners and developing the consortium. A lot of that work is done now without funding. So if some small pot of funding was provided in the beginning, you could allow a more, I guess, longer term or critical process of selecting who is involved, ensuring fit of both individuals and also organizations with the project mission. So that's one thing. And in that also starting to build up that trust that is necessary for this transdisciplinary research. And then, as I mentioned just briefly with this planning and then doing. So now everything has to be planned out in advance before people start coming together. That doesn't really fit with transdisciplinary research, because there we want to define the questions together, we want to define the methods together, and also we want to define some of the deliverables together. What are we actually working towards? And I think what we've seen in Agroecology-TRANSECT, we all come together at these meetings twice a year. We develop many great ideas and new things that we could work on, but then we kind of always fall back onto the DOA and the description of action that we've contractually agreed to in the beginning. So yeah, maybe there's need to have that be more loose in the beginning and allow it to be more emergent as we go on. So maybe that's saying we define it more at year one, year two, have moments of checking in with, I guess, less administrative burden to make changes. I know just to put in for our project coordinator who's not here, he's estimated he's spent about a year of work on administration. And that's all time that's not going to developing solutions and to working on change processes. And that's a big burden that isn't maybe is necessary to some extent, but I think there's room to lighten that up. So that's just a few thoughts, but yeah, definitely something to think about. What kind of mechanisms could enable this flexibility more?
Great, thanks. Great question and answer. So we'll move on to hear from our innovation hubs in a second. Finally, before we do, just something from the chat from Jamal makes a point I wanted to share. They want to highlight that the private sector, banks and companies engaged in CSR strategies play a crucial role in advancing the agroecological transition, and says that the findings from TRANSECT project show that finance, risk management and responsible investment are key levers. By integrating agroecology into their CSR commitments, supporting research and innovation, and developing tailored financial mechanisms, private sector actors can accelerate the adoption of sustainable practices and strengthen impacts across territories. Just sharing that as an observation or a comment from Jamal in the chat. Keep putting your comments in, and please, if you have a question, you can go in the Q&A. It's easier for us to answer live or written from the panel, because we've got loads to get through. And I think we're going to go first to Guadeloupe and hear a bit more from Carla. And Carla, if I can ask you, I think we've got a slide to illustrate your innovation hub there to kind of set the scene for us a little bit about the work that you do there with farmers in Guadeloupe. Yeah, Anna's just lining that up, but I'll hand over to you and then hear a little bit about your thoughts on the kind of discussion we're having around policy today after you've set the scene. So yeah, over to you.
Right, so I'm Carla Barlagne. I'm a researcher and I'm an agricultural economist at INRAE, and I work at the Astro Research Unit in Guadeloupe in the French Caribbean. So I will introduce you briefly to what we do and what our innovation hub is in Guadeloupe. So it is an innovation hub that comprises a network of farms, including 2 experimental farms. And so we are located in Guadeloupe, in one of the outermost regions of Europe. And the objectives of our innovation hub is to test innovation, breakthrough agroecological systems based on bioeconomy and agroecology principles. So we aim to design and assess innovation, but also to design new design rules, define design rules for farming systems, for farmers to be enabled to shift to agroecology. We aim to produce references on the agronomy, environmental, societal, economics, and resilience of the systems in the face of climate hazard. And by doing that work, we aim to contribute to 2 key aspects. One is to support policy and to help design better agro-environmental policy. And also we aim to be research, training, and development interfaces, welcoming a lot of people, students, farmers to our premises to see and learn and test on our site. Next slide, please. So as we are in very diverse systems, we generally, Guadeloupean farms are mostly family farms. The average farm size is 4.4 hectares, and they are characterized by a huge diversity. And we are in a tropical climate, and where we are prone to heavy pest pressure, climate hazards such as hurricane and droughts. So small agroecological farms are seen as a lever for food security and enable to answer challenges such as high unemployment. So in terms of the research questions we try to address, we work on, we look at, for example, the use of service plant to attract for biological control, for bio inputs for plants, biostimulation and pest repellent function. We look at mulching technique for weed management and water saving, answering some of the challenges raised by agroecological systems. We'll evaluate service animal for weed control, preliminary soil plowing, and we also focus on understanding the matching between crops and livestock resources in circular agroecological systems. So in the next slide, you're going to example of our activity is the assessment of bio inputs with local plant resources. So those are 2 plants at the bottom that we have been testing on our experimental side, and we have tested them in a participatory way where we, as you can see on the picture at the bottom, welcoming farmers and extension workers to come to our site. And we also conduct and evaluate the agroecological the performances of agroecology in a network of farms by doing interviews. We have done interviews with 32 farmers and farm managers and taking some samples, soil and soil fauna. Next slide, please. So here are some of our key results if you're wanting to know more about the work that we do. And that's it for me.
Great. Thanks so much, Carla, for setting the scene. And I think Carla and some colleagues we're lining up a webinar to talk more about some of the technical side of that and the integrated pest management and water management with some other innovation hubs. And we're just lining that up for January. I'm looking for the date. I think we've got a date, but I'll mention it at the end. But yeah, thanks so much for setting the scene. I wonder if we hear from Alexandra next to take us to Slovenia. And I never say it right, but it's Green Box Čarna.
Well, I mean, the company is Čarna and the product is Zeleni Zabojček, so it's the green box, small green box, actually, if you...
Small, right. Well, as I've demonstrated, Alexandra will explain much better than me. So we'll go from tropical Guadeloupe over to Slovenia, where maybe it's not so warm at the moment. I don't know.
Just go to the other slide, because it's... So, yeah, so Alexandra Waldmann. I am originally German, but I do live in Slovenia for almost 20 years now. The Green Box is, we are a small company, a small business that we founded some 16 years ago. And at the core, we are a veg box scheme. So that means we deliver local, seasonal, organic food to people's homes and offices. Our focus was from the beginning to go for local. And what that means is, of course, it also means seasonal. So seasonal, because only then you can really, and we've been trying to build, this seasonality so that we have more local stuff throughout the year. As you do this business, and we started as a pure trader, so getting offer from farmers. We've built a network of over 70 farmers that we do work with on a yearly basis, on a weekly basis. It's maybe 10, 15 that can supply and do supply to us on this basis. And we built this network, but then we also saw that there are so many aspects, and some of them were also already mentioned by Adrien today, that need to look closer. And since none of us really comes from a farming background, so I'm a geographer by training, we wanted to explore this, and then we started also to farm ourselves. So what you see now on the bottom right part is our experimental field, where we created projects and trying to help farmers. Because as Adrien said, one of the output was sometimes there's machinery, and as a small farmer, you cannot afford it, or it doesn't suit your specific purposes. So we tried, for example, a simple decision-making support tool for farmers to be able to irrigate more properly. So not just gut feeling, but purposeful for the plant in question that has its own specific growth period, but also based on what's the weather, what's the soil capacity, and so on. So these are some of the things we do. And then, of course, pest control. And generally speaking, more agroecological approaches to farming. Slovenia is a country where also the average farm size is very small. So it's below 10 hectares, far below 10 hectares. But if you go to what is the average farm size focused on food production, so vegetables, fruit, then that is even a smaller number. So many of our farmers maybe have 10, 15 hectares, but they only grow vegetables on like half a hectare or 1 hectare. So there is, so that's the kind of scene within which we work. And the process of the boxes is that we collect the offer, what's coming this week. We put it on the website. We then pack it. The farmers deliver to us, and we deliver it. And we try as much as possible by bike, as you can see, with the trailer. But some part is, of course, also done via van still. But we've reduced that input very much. I think about half of our boxes are now delivered by bike, so with less CO2. So we really try to incorporate this sustainability approach in all our aspects of the business. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thanks, Alexandra. And I'm delighted you were here today, because I think you give from the panel quite a unique insight or point of view as someone who is a practitioner, who is doing it, who's also part of the research done through Agroecology-TRANSECT, but also working with farmers and actually farming yourself in a way with the trial plot, so you kind of got a unique perspective. And with that in mind, I wonder if you, from that point of view, are there any kind of important key messages you want to be heard at a policy level, be that member state level or kind of European level? What would you like policymakers to be hearing from you as a practitioner and as a farmer, Anna?
Well, some of the aspects that are really important have already been mentioned, by either Stephen and or Adrien. But I think that policy needs to treat nature as a critical infrastructure for our future, for our common future. And with that come, of course, different aspects. So what does it need? What are the aspects that are really important? Let's take soil. So soil health is one key aspect, but it's not the only one. So the complexity of the interlinkages are really important. But if you have, let's stick to soil. So you have soil. Who is the one taking care of soil health? Is going to be the farmers, because they work the land. But it has also other connections with, let's say, infrastructure development and so on. But it's just to be there. And if the farmers are the ones that are taking care of the land as they are, then this is a service they provide for everybody. So they protect a common good, and they need to be remunerated for that service. So that means get away from acres or from land size to services to done with and through this land and by protecting it. And then that means that policy needs to help the farmers do the right thing. And that is the enabling framework, because only then they can also thrive. And as we've heard, especially small farmers do have problems in surviving. So it is a tricky life to be a small farmer specifically, because they are not remunerated. I mean, if you look at a small family farm, their income, you say, okay, they get this and this and this. But what you don't see is, because there is no labor, there is free labor on the farm that is not paid. It's the mother, it's the grandmother, it's the children, if they're old enough, to help out on the farm. They do that for nothing. And people still expect food to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So this discrepancy has to be broken. And that means that policy has to focus on what really has a value. So let's say soil and biodiversity and that needs to be remunerated. But what that also means is that it should be food before feed. So while animals are part of the whole system, why is it that feed is grown in the best areas? Highly intense food is not. So food before feed would be another aspect. And then consider, when creating policy, what's the cost of not doing the right thing? What's the cost of not protecting soil? What's the cost of not protecting biodiversity? And make the connection, because it's not just about potentially not having food, but it also impacts our health system. So how many costs do we pay in another system because the health system is overburdened because we do not eat safe food, or we eat less and less safe food? So these aspects, I think, key.
And nutritious food, probably too, safe and nutritious.
Yes, and ethically produced, essentially.
So like the hidden costs.
Yes,
the hidden costs aren't recognised. You kind of
definitely yes,
appropriately at policy level.
Yes.
Thanks, Alexandra. We'll come back in a sec, I'm sure, and we'll have some questions as well from whoever would like to ask them. But I'd like to put a similar question to Carla around, what's also working with small agroecological farmers there in Guadeloupe. What's your message for policymakers that might be in the room designing CAP or otherwise? What would you like to hammer home as a key policy message?
Yes, thank you, Tim. I think I totally agree with Alexandra on the fact that we need to better take into account the reality of those farming agroecological systems, because they require more labor that is not necessarily seen because it's mainly done by family farms. So those characteristics need to be taken into account much better and reflected and remunerated. And the second point, a second point is actually we haven't yet, at least to my knowledge, characterized well enough the cost of pesticides and on the environment, on human health. And we haven't, you mentioned hidden cost, and we are not really aware of actually what it does it cost to actually go down or keep doing the business as usual. So we need to better take into account those costs to redesign policies and actually have a clear view of what is best for us at a global scales. And I think in terms of redesigning policy, one key aspect is that we need to policies need to account better for the complexity of agroecological systems and the multiple dimensions that they contribute to. So we talked about environment, we talked about what the benefits they produce at the social level, generating employment, making sure people eat food that is culturally adequate and local food, and that it is produced within the territory and maintaining people in this territory. But also we need to account for the diversity of European farms in terms of farm size. So you have big, medium, small, very small family farms, the type of crops and livestock, which is very diverse across Europe. And taking this into account, it will help improve the support for farmers who adopt agroecological practices, and how some ideas about how this could be done, or it would be, as we mentioned earlier when with Stephen, it would be to increase flexibility of the tools that are available to us. So here, the flexibility of the evaluation tool to better reflect this complexity and diversity. We need to also reward for the social and environmental benefits provided by agroecology, and also help support the cost of transition, because it does take a lot for farmers to change practices. It does take a lot of time and resources to acquire this new knowledge, change the system. There are more complex systems, so you have to support farmers into enabling change step by step, and also make sure that there is better support for small family farms. And the last point I would like to make is to streamline administrative procedures to make it easier for every farmers to access support, because a lot of the farmers we are working with, because they are very diverse, they are faced with a complexity of administrative procedure to make sure that their crops are taken into account. And for example, we have a system today that does not recognize the subsidy system is not designed efficiently enough to reflect crop associations, for example. So farmers in Guadeloupe have to declare, they have let's say 30 crops associated on their farm, but then they can only declare one main or two main crops because they cannot account for the different crops grown on the same surface. So the tools need to be adapted to better reflect that.
Yeah, thanks. Funny enough, it sort of strikes me that the administrative burden, whether it's farm level or research level, and bureaucracy seems to kind of be a recurring theme today of sort of things that come up, whether it's the farmer or it's Stephen kind of, or with the project, or Bertrand spending, our project coordinator spending a year on admin. It kind of gets in the way of the actual work and the actual transition that we want to bring about, or some of us want to bring about. And I also think there's a problem actually that the administrative burden is heavier on the smaller, potentially more agroecological farmers, because big farms that I know will have advisors and have support systems that they pay to do all that work, but actually it's really hard to do that on a small farm level, because the kind of ratio, the burden is too high. Sebastian Lackner has a question, so I'll pass to you, Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Actually, it's a remark, because I was listening to the presentations, and I guess especially what Carla was saying last reflects pretty well what science is saying about how to create policies. And there is, first of all, one very widely accepted principle that taxpayers' money should be paid for something like public goods, or to remunerate positive externalities, so service brought to the society, like biodiversities and landscape. And this is all about agroecology. Agroecological farms are providing those services. The question is, to what extent is policy designed to remunerate that, and on the other hand, also reflect the external costs of conventional farming. So if we have overuse of mineral fertilizer or pesticides, we create costs which have to be taken by society. And this is something also where policy has to come into play. And this is widely accepted. The question is whether we are using the Common Agricultural Policy in an appropriate way. So this is the first point I wanted to make. Second point is, of course, there are many struggles reported here on the market side. We are missing a structural market, or a market structure which makes services like agroecological practices transparent. We have done that for the organic farming in a quite successful way. Organic is established. However, these practices of agroecology needs to be, let's say, designed at the market level in a transparent way so that consumers can pay higher prices for those practices. So this is the second, let's say, task for policy. And the third task is, of course, funding knowledge and innovation. And even that is widely accepted in science as a policy task. So spending money, investing money into building up knowledge for people working in the sector, and even informing the wider public, to consumers, about services brought up by farms who are practicing agroecology and also practicing other beneficial stuff. These investments are highly justified because they pay back in the long term. And this is still something I wanted to, many things which have presented this morning by Stephen, by Adria, Alexandra, Carla. Generally, these are widely accepted scientific principle. And the interesting question is policy designed to use these principles? And this is just the point I wanted to make, because it's so crystal clear what the other colleagues have presented. So that's why I wanted to make a short intervention. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. Yeah, that's a really, really good point, and perhaps also gives a bit of a taster of what you're about to speak to in the next section too. So it's a nice segue. But I see Alexandra wants to say something, so I'll go over to you.
Thanks, Sebastian, for this. Definitely. It's just one point sort of, I wouldn't say irritated me, but stuck with me is this. So on the one hand, we need to internalize the external costs, as you said. But on the other hand, you said that enable that consumers pay more for agroecologically produced food. And I think somehow it shouldn't really be that the costs are always put on the good stuff, but I think the cost shouldn't be put on the bad stuff. So really that the non-agroecologically produced food is getting more expensive, and the agroecological food, which should be the standard, is affordable to a wider part of society. And I think this is where policy needs to tweak.
Thanks. Guy.
I wanted to make a point on this as well, because in fact the question of whom are we paying the costs on is really interesting. If we are paying as taxpayers for the Common Agricultural Policy, and then we need to pay more for healthy food, then something is wrong in the system. So obviously something is not flowing well, which would be, the transition towards my presentation and the one by Sebastian, as we're going to talk about that. So thanks, Alexandra, for raising a very valid point, which I will make in a few seconds as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's a perfect segue, really. It's almost like we planned it. So I want, there's loads of more questions I could put to Carla and Alexandra, but I think we move on now. But thanks very much for your insight from the Innovation Hubs. And just a reminder, if you're watching at home, you can find out more about all of our Innovation Hubs on the Agroecology-TRANSECT website. And there's a film coming soon as well, featuring some of them. But talking science and policy, we will pass over to Guy, who I'm sure can introduce himself much better than I will. And Guy, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. So indeed, my name is Guy Peer. I'm leading the group on agriculture and ecosystems within the Department of Biodiversity and People in UFZ and in IDIV. And within the project Agroecology-TRANSECT, we are leading work package 6, which is about upscaling. So in order to explain what we're trying to do and how this relates to science and policy or science policy interfacing, we need to put all these presentations in a greater context. And I'm testing whether I can shift slides. It seems that I do not have control. So please move to the next slide and I'll say click next times when I'm trying to transfer. So let's put the challenges of farmers in a greater context. This is a global issue that we are seeing structural changes. There are less and less farmers. As you can see here in red, you can see the number of small farmers declining very rapidly, regardless of whether this is in Northwestern, Southern, or Eastern Europe, whereas the number of large, very large farms is increasing. And of course, this is very few farmers that are benefiting. So we have fewer people there. We have rural exodus. We have land being owned by less and less people. And this is a global structural change, which we can or cannot change. This is a very dramatic change. We have less people, more tractors and machinery to replace them, less labor. We have an issue with farm income, which we've been hearing for many years, especially in the EU, and has been actually a common agricultural policy objective. Most of the money is going to pay farmers for being farmers. But this is based on hectares. And so if we are constantly hearing this problem, it is because it's not resolved, which means farmers are being dependent on additional funding from the CAP, but this is not resolving the problem of lower incomes, which comes to the other side of the problem, that the farmer incomes are partly impacted by the control of other actors in the group, such as retailers, supermarkets, producers, etc. So we have the issue of the value chain when many people gaining along this process, where in agroecology we're talking often about reducing and shortening value chains, but there is no mechanism actually installed in the Common Agricultural Policy to address its own objective on that, meaning that maybe the CAP either is not delivering or we need other instruments such as a food policy. I'll come back to that later. So on the other hand, I need to move slide. Thank you. On the other hand, on top of all these challenges, we have climate change, and especially if you have monocultures, you'll be impacted dramatically if there's a drought or heat, or if you leave the soil uncovered through winter, then you'll see soil erosion. And wet and cold spells, as in last year, have killed entire wheat fields that you can see here in the picture. So add to that as well the pollution which is created by the overuse of pesticides and other agrochemicals, and this is impacting the water, the soil, biodiversity, which is then affecting also soil biodiversity, affecting production as well. Click again. So we are seeing here risk of the current non-sustainable farming systems to farmers, to farming. Farmers themselves are being contributing, but also affected by climate change and biodiversity losses, and there are health issues of the current system. But also there's a risk to food security if you're continuing to produce in this way, as ecosystems are collapsing. Now, in this project, if you can click again, we are discussing and testing a lot of the assumptions about agroecology being part of the solutions to that. But usually we are asking about the solutions to the environmental questions. However, we have also the challenges that relate to socio-economy and to the upscaling of good practices. Click again. So this brings me to the challenges of upscaling. If we have 11 innovation hubs where we're testing local solutions, then we're constantly coming across barriers and levers, and we need to ask ourselves, how do we bring that to Brussels? How do we bring that to policymakers? Because a lot of the problems that farmers are experiencing are particularly big if they're trying to transit towards agroecology. They are less competitive compared to others. If you have less cows on a hectare, then obviously you'll have less income. And if you're not visible to the markets, then you have costs to produce more. If you implement integrated pest management, it's more complicated. You need more knowledge for that. But in that case, you need better competitive possibilities for the farmers participating. Awareness gaps mentioned earlier by both Adrien and Stephen mean that somebody is not communicating that. So again, you need more support from policies. When we are talking about policy inconsistencies, we're talking about inconsistencies within the different instruments of the Common Agricultural Policy, but also other policies. And there's poor inclusion of farmers and other stakeholders that are relevant for agroecology in decision-making and implementation. We've been hearing repeatedly from people saying, people do not hear us, or policymakers do not hear us in Brussels. Clicking again, what is quite staggering in the current policy situation is that the CAP and other policies are currently putting disincentives for engagement in sustainable farming systems. So there's not enough economic support that would cover the various types of costs, not only transaction costs, but also opportunity costs, etc. There are ample disincentives in the form of more regulations, more documentation and controls, including risk of sanctions if you're engaging in agroecology, and many administrative burdens resulting from the lack of overview of what instruments do you have, what support you can get, or even farm advisory services saying, oh, don't do that because it will be more complicated. And then the policy instruments are constantly changing. The names of the instruments and the footnotes on what needs to be done and how is actually constantly changing, especially in this context of agroecology. And finally, when it comes to the farmer itself, often they're encountering huge rigidity and poor flexibility to implement what they think or believe or what they know that might be very useful for their local conditions. So we're hearing a lot about the need of flexibility, but member states are usually hijacking that towards flexibility for member states to do what they don't want to do, or not to do what they don't want to do. But we're not hearing enough about the flexibility that we actually need, which is the one for the farmers. Click next. So putting that in a broader context, basically, some years ago, we heard about the launching of the Green Deal. We heard about climate law. We heard, but then we stopped hearing about sustainable food systems framework, which we know that the Commission has been working on. And we need to realize that there are already some mechanisms installed for the environment, for agroecology, like the bird directives, habitat directives. There was a lot of discussion around the nature restoration regulation, which I'll talk about soon. And it was adopted. And we have the sustainable use regulation, which was rejected. But on top of all these, eventually, when you're talking about agriculture, click again, the dominating factor, of course, is the Common Agricultural Policy. I'm not going to present the CAP in a full way, but rather highlight the fact that if you look at the current CAP objectives, they actually fall into the categories of what you would define as sustainability. And 3 of the 9 objectives, 10 with the hijack of the addition of knowledge and innovation, which is not an official CAP objective. But 3 of them are really environmental and possibly important for climate and biodiversity. And this is really important. So if you click again, the other issue is that there are a range of instruments already installed and actually expanded in the last reform with the establishment of eco schemes, with the enhancing of conditionality. And we have other instruments which are supportive, such as knowledge support in the form of leadership or leader program, areas of nature constraints, which member states could or could not use for the sake of supporting agroecology. Usually they don't. But there's a big set of instruments which have changed in the last reform, which you can see on left versus right, with the expansion of support for agroecology and for the environment. However, if you click again, the overall support system is such that you can put the green parts of the payments on the right side. You can put the orange side, which would be the coupled payments or harmful subsidies, on the extreme other side, and you could say that there are negative harmful subsidies. And in between, you still have a large bulk, which is kind of gray payments for farmers to be farmers, hectare-based system, which we hardly even know what it's going to do. And this is basically supporting business as usual, meaning that farmers eventually will take their decisions towards business as usual. And this is a big problem that we are still facing. If you click again, then there are some good news in the last years. As part of the Green Deal, we've seen the expansion of CAP environmental investments in the last reform. We've seen the adoption of the nature restoration regulation. And recently, just in September, the EU has adopted the Soil Monitoring and Health Directive, which is very important for soil, even if it's watered down to the original proposal of actually knowing what farmers are fully doing and asking for transparency regarding agrochemical use and management. However, click again, and the big issue is that within the good news that we are hearing from Brussels, there are also many negative steps that are being taken. Since the beginning of the war on Ukraine, there has been a systematic deregulation and release of duty from CAP instruments regarding the environment, with a lot of misinformation around it. There was an attack on the nature restoration regulation. And now the Commission has put a proposal which Sebastian will analyze and which we are very concerned about for the next CAP, basically reducing rather than increasing environmental ambition and social ambition. There is proposal for simplification, basically throwing out of the window a lot of the standards which currently exist, etc., etc. And in this context, what I want to ask is basically, how do we foster, as scientists, the science policy interface, and what can we build and bring from the projects that we are running so that we can see more engagement of science and the results of what we are doing in science policy. So here are a few examples of what can be the roles of science, or where do we see the role of science in supporting this transition. The first example is by the exploration, and this is a typical work of scientists, is to be free of the policy framework and just ask, what if, and work with scenarios. So this is the work which we are currently doing, led by Lizzie Finch and Lynn Chan in the UFZ in our group. And they've gathered various scenarios from the literature. 4 scenarios we found are the most important ones, including business as usual, strengthening green and social architecture, a food systems policy, which will include both producing and consuming sides, and if this doesn't work, substantially reducing CAP payments, which would be basically giving up in one form or the other. And we asked a large number of experts what will happen if this is happening. If you can click again, I want to focus on one interesting result, which is the feasibility, the chance that this actually happens without talking about the actual implementation and the outcomes. And what is interesting is that among the 4 scenarios, experts were saying that option 4, the reduction of budgets, is the least probable one. Click again. This is actually what the current situation is, where the Commission has proposed actually merging different instruments and actually reducing CAP payments. So one lesson I wanted to take on that is, if you click again, that basically as scientists, we should be free to think and to explore and to ponder about what could be the reality, because policies can change in many directions. And so what will happen even in just 2 years from now is unclear as we are speaking. Click again to the next role, which is again relatively traditional form in which we as scientists can support and mediate. But the tweak in this system is that in the city of Leipzig, we've actually been proactive. We approached the city of Leipzig after learning that they already have a dialogue for 2 years around sustainable food policy, and a company was asked to produce such a policy. Instead, they proposed a point system for land procurement, meaning that for the land that the city is owning, farmers will have to allocate different points, basically following sustainability criteria, but there was no progress for 3 years. And so we approached them and actually helped them reigniting the process, and then we were part of the dialogue. If you click again, and we found ourselves being not just part of the dialogue because we're not stakeholders, but actually mediators in the system. We brought the science into the table and could demonstrate that the interests of the different parties and actors can be all accommodated within the point system. And that led to a coalition voting eventually for this point system in October 2023. Click again and you'll learn that this is further to be explored in Project La Feria, a follow-up project where we are exploring how we can foster the restoration of landscape features in intensive agricultural areas, and where we selected Leipzig to be a case study on how can we foster this into the future. Next role that we have is to bring the case that we are just hearing now into Brussels. You've just heard the presentations from Adrien and from Stephen and the policy briefs that they have produced. We have another policy brief produced in another project, Cup4GI, where we talked to a lot of farmers to try to understand what their problems were. And we had an event in Brussels where we brought both the plea of farmers and other actors for support, demanding an action from policymakers. It's their responsibility to do that. And in a way, we should be proactive and bring that. And we were very happy to have members of 4 political parties attending our event in Brussels in the 11th of November. However, we are pretty concerned that still they are a minority within their own parties, and the overall spirit remains quite negative. So we will continue bringing the case and try to foster the science policy interaction, recalling that they don't always come to us. We're not stakeholders and we are often forgotten. So we may need to be more proactive if we want to be heard in Brussels or among the ministries in our countries. The next role in that case is to speak up. If we are not being heard and if we feel that misinformation is used, it's our mandate using our science to speak up. And this was the case of the Nature Restoration Regulation as well as the Sustainable Use Regulation. In 2023, there was a major attack on these regulations before they were about to be adopted by the Parliament. And when we heard these arguments, we noticed that much of that was based on misinformation. The consequence was that we published an open letter by scientists where we took one claim after the other. Many of the claims were directly related to agroecology, claiming that the Nature Restoration Regulation will risk food security, will take jobs away, it will force farmers to abandon land, and it will prevent Europe from feeding the world, which we know that is not the case. So we published this letter, and the outcome was that the Nature Restoration Regulation indeed was approved, but interestingly, the Sustainable Use Regulation was still rejected, proving the power of lobby organizations that managed to use the same arguments in a much more powerful way. And this is now published in the journal People in Nature, where we are reflecting on the role of science in this argumentation, because basically under different arguments, there can be different paths. And the reason this is so important, because still the same misinformation has flown into the final version of the Nature Restoration Regulation in the form of Article 27. And we need to be aware that the misinformation is constantly there and being brought up again. One small example for that in the next slide shows that in Article 27 of the Nature Restoration Regulation, member states will be able to stop the implementation of Article 11, which is the agricultural part of the NRR, under extreme conditions that can risk food security, basically. And what one can see if you read this argumentation is that basically Article 27 is false or flawed in several ways. If you click again, first of all, because there are hardly any justifiable situations which are so extreme where, because of a few restored areas, there is not enough area for food production for the sake of European food production. Secondly, if you release these lands, this is marginal to the 70% area used for feed and fuel. And finally, member states can stop the implementation of Article 11, but they still need to implement the rest, like Article 10 or others. So, in fact, we do see an obligation of member states to implement the NRR regardless of what extreme conditions are upon us. To come to the next and final role of scientists, if this doesn't work, we don't always need to talk to policymakers directly. I think it's important to also empower others to take an action. So if a farmer is doing good, why not be visible in that? Now, the Nature Restoration Regulation, Article 11.2, also incorporated butterflies as an indicator. And so using citizen science, we can ask people to collect data in their farms. We can ask what butterflies do you have? But current monitoring that is taking place is too localized. We don't have enough data to answer local questions such as, if you click again, does agroecology work? If a farmer is doing better, do we see more butterflies on their field? And how can we make a farmer more visible if they do have more butterflies? And this is where citizen science is a tool for implementation and for support, not only for policymakers, but also for empowerment of people. If you click again, in project Agroecology-TRANSECT, we want to count on people, to work with people, and to count with people. And so we launched, if you click again, we launched a protocol, a very simple protocol that was originally coming from urban environments, and we adjusted it to agroecology, where people can count in a small field or a small area, either in the field edge or in the middle. And we asked people to visit at least 3 places, and we launched a small campaign in the Agroecology-TRANSECT group with the help of Soil Association. Click again, and what you can see is that in the campaign of 2025, we harvested data from 38 sites and from people participating. But this is very small. If we want to do that on the scales that we need for implementation and policy support, we'll need a lot more. So please do join us and keep track of what we're doing also in the year 26. If you click again here, if you follow the project, please do look at what we're doing to support that. So to wrap up here, there's a lot that we can do as scientists, as participants in this project, to foster the dialogue, to mediate, to depolarize current discussions around agriculture. And we need to try to find our ways to empower stakeholders and other key people and policymakers that want to do good. And final statement here is that in order to maximize our impacts, we need to take the courage to speak up, to take knowledge from different disciplines, work not only with facts, but also with people, with narratives, with emotions, because it's about people eventually, and the work collaboratively to seek a transition towards a change. So with that, I should thank many people with whom we're working in this project and who the results of whom I have just presented. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Guy. Really interesting presentation. We're going to move straight on to Sebastian in a second. Just if you have questions for Guy, please put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and we'll come to them after Sebastian. But I will hand over and leave the floor to Sebastian Lackner.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Can we go back to the slides? Okay, thank you very much. I'm now gonna focus in my talk on the question to what extent the proposed cap after 2028, so for the coming period, is appropriate to pick up these challenges, which are worked out well from the previous presentations. And what you can see is our guess is that the current proposal is largely failing for farmers and for the environment. And this is something I'm going to show now. Yeah, thank you. First of all, I mean, the CAP is reformed every 7 years. So in a way, this is a normal procedure to think about how to further develop this. Now, what we could see in the current CAP period is that in many details, we have criticized this policy draft when it was presented 2018 to 21 during the reform process, because in many details, you can still ask yourself whether that is ambitious enough. However, it is a framework which can be used to do ambitious policies. And we could observe linked to minimum spending requirements. So 25% in the first pillar, for instance, and 35% in the second pillar has led to an all-time high in spending, in environmental spending within the CAP, which is what I'm going to show you. And so in a way, there was still some improvement within the CAP. It's the question to what extent that is sufficient, also given the fact that Guy P.S. mentioned it, after 2022, there was an environmental backlash. So there were huge simplifications within the CAP. However, these simplifications were not actual simplification, but were just taking back environmental rules like no fallow land requirement, so the GAIC 8, or a less grassland support, a reduced requirement to control small farms. Well, the question is to what extent this will help the environment. The Commission has given up largely on the farm to fork strategy. And the nature restoration law or nature restoration regulation has gone through only because of a huge societal protests to maintain this. So this is still a sign of light. And the question is now, can the CAP post-2028 deliver on the main socio-economic and environmental challenges? And this is what I'm going to present now. And please also note this analysis is part of our work in Agroecology-TRANSECT. So there are many other contributors, like, for instance, Guy Pierre is also part of this process and many others. Now, the first very big change or proposed change is that we will get a huge national regional partnership fund. And the common agricultural policy is only part of that fund. So we do not have those two separate agriculture funds as we used to have. So the guarantee fund and the fund for rural development, so the first and second pillar. And the Commission is planning to give that up, and the CAP will only be one chapter of this new partnership fund. There's one maybe positive element that we have harmonized rules and application procedures. At the moment, if you want to do regional policy, you have 3 different funds with different rules, and this is, of course, a problem. Now, this small simplification comes at very high costs. And this is what I'm showing to you next, but please also note that we have budget markers. 43% of spending has to be relevant for climate and environment. Now we are putting together 2 issues which are not overlapping. So if you do something for climate, it's not necessarily for biodiversity. And this can already be a problem. And these budget markers are pretty vague, and you can do a lot of calculus on the paper, which is not relevant in the practice. Within this fund, around 300 billion has to be spent for the CAP, and member states can use additional money. And within this proposal, the CAP proposal is extremely short. So we have 25 articles. In the last proposal, we had 142 articles, and in the reform before, even 155. So this new CAP proposal is basically giving up on many, many details. And the main message, if you simplify it a little bit, is please, member states, you can do largely whatever you want. There are only a few stops and a few rules to it. Next slide, please. And what might be problematic on this big new fund is that we have so many topics in that. And if you look into the logic of this new fund, you will find out, first of all, if you look on the topics treated here, you have the whole fishery policy is inside, you have the cohesion funds and the regional policies within, but you also have something like migration, border and security. You have economic policy and social policies, and you have something like just transition fund. And now you can imagine yourselves in the member states, who has to negotiate that? Because it's a regulation, and in the council, the member states have to find a common position, and every member states now, different ministries, in our case 4 or 5, have to negotiate and find their position. And that is already pretty complicated. And afterwards, after we decided that, all these ministries have to put together a big, huge plan. And already only the strategic plan for the CAP was demanding for the ministries. This will be probably a nightmare because it's over-complex and very, very demanding in terms of understanding what you can fund and what not. So this is one of the problems. Next slide. Now getting to the CAP proposal itself, also largely problematic because we continue the direct payment system. So first of all, we have a secondary ring fencing, which says every member state has to offer direct payments between 130 and 240 euros per hectare. And these direct payments, and I have a slightly diverging opinion to that, it's not remunerating farmers, it's remunerating landowners. So if you own land, you're a happy person because you get the money whether you are farming or not. So even institutions can, through the rental payments for land, you can require those payments. And this is something which has been a long time criticized by science, and the Commission is still maintaining this instrument, and it's a waste of taxpayers' money because it does not do anything about societal values. The second element is, no, please go back, that was too fast. The second small element is we have degressivity and capping. And so we cut, for larger farms, we cut the payments. You can do a lot of debates on that. As a scientist, I would be critical. I guess this will not cure those weaknesses of the direct payments if we do that. But no matter what attitude you have to those redistributive measures, at the end of the day, the Council will cancel this measure anyway, because we have many Eastern European member states and they will not let this go through. So we will probably waste a lot of money and brain on this measure. And in all the last reforms, it has never gone through. So this is something where the Commission is proposing something knowing that it will not get through. So this is another criticism. Please, next slide. Just showing you that these minimum spending requirements of 130 euros just mean that 8 member states have to increase their direct payments. And that is completely counterintuitive. Also, given the fact that at some point the Ukraine will enter the European Union and we have to lower the direct payments, otherwise the excess of the Ukraine. And this is something which is important. It's important that the Ukraine is joining the European Union. We have a huge interest in that. We must have. And this excess will be far too expensive if we maintain direct payments. Next slide, please. Now, this is something relevant now for agroecology. As I pointed out, public goods are a huge argument to do taxpayer spending. And around 1/4 of the cap is already on those public goods. However, the proposal is pretty weak on that. The general rules, which has been in the past conditionality, has been further weakened. So continuing this path of weakening the general rules for the common market. So the new farm stewardship is really just a table with more or less 5 criteria, really a weak instrument. The agro-environmental and climate action, replacing eco schemes and agro-environmental and climate measure. Okay, now you have one instrument, that is good. However, there is no explicit minimum spending requirement, just the weak budget markers. And even that could lead to a situation that member states do not feel obliged to spend much for this instrument, and that will be weakening the chances of agroecology and of organic farming, of extensive grazing. Take whatever you like from the agro-environmental from the agro-environmental policies. And this is also not a good sign. And there is no clear focus here. Next slide. So weak conditionality, protective practices also weak, and agro-environmental and climate actions are just one instrument without minimum requirement. Interestingly, or ironically, I would say, the Commission has kept one rule for the agro-environmental policies, which does not make any sense, that has been long time criticized by many practitioners or scientists is the requirement to do payments according costs and income foregone. And this used to be a requirement from the WTO. However, the WTO nowadays is almost dead. And we know from many other member states like Norway, like Switzerland, that you can create that this requirement doesn't apply. So I'm asking, if you simplify, why are we maintaining this? It doesn't make sense. It will not help small farms getting remuneration. We do not have minimum spending requirements for the environmental budget. And finally, and this final point is even more severe, is that the co-funding rules have changed. At the moment, for eco schemes, zero co-funding. For the agri-environmental and climate measures in the second pillar, something regularly around 20%. However, shifted money from the first pillar is also co-funding free. And now we increase that in total for the total instrument to 30%. So this will strongly increase the cost for many member states. Even in Germany, as a rich industrial country, some of our federal states might get into trouble financing agri-environmental schemes, and this is really critical. Let's have a short look on the statistics. This just shows you 25% of the current CAP is on environment. That was a good tendency. You see an increasing tendency over time. It would make sense to strengthen and continue this path. The CAP proposal does not continue it. Next slide. You can even show that as an ambitious and rich member state, Germany has even increased their spending to 33%. So 1/3 of the CAP is here environmental spending. And in many details, you can look this up into the FAO study I've presented here. So there are chances in the current framework, and I'm not clear why the Commission has decided to cancel this path. Continue. So conclusion, this new unified fund will increase insecurity, especially for agriculture. As Guy-Pierre mentioned, we rename all the instrument every 7 years. It doesn't make sense. You could have done a small reform, slightly improving the current framework. The Commission has decided differently, and this will, is not useful, and member states will have a lot of trouble with this. We have less rules, which does, however, not always mean simplification, and the COM has still instrument to bother the member states with initial letters where you ask yourself, where do they come from? There is no clear rules to that, and that is might enhance arbitrary governance. Ring fencing is missing. The Commission is only maintaining and securing this instrument, which has been mostly criticized. So direct payments are not an instrument of the future, it's an instrument of the past, and even capping and degressivity will not solve that. The green architecture has been significantly weakened. And again, if you fix most of the money for direct payments, you will be missing those money also for things like foster innovation, build and strengthen knowledge for farm workers, inform consumers about agroecology. So all the things which has been presented in the first path as policy needs from agroecological innovation hubs. So all that stuff needs to be financed, and the money will be missing because all goes into direct payments. So the Commission is putting all that small progress at risk, and therefore I would argue the CAP proposal is not fit for future. It does not include an idea how to treat the EU accession of Ukraine. If you maintain direct payments, you run into a lot of trouble. And even for the nature restoration law, where we need the CAP payments, this is not systematically picked up. So overall, I guess there is a lot of things to discuss. We also had the feeling in Brussels that these issues are very important to discuss and to improve, and I hope the policy will react on that. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention. Looking forward for the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Sebastian. Yeah, great presentation. We are running a bit over time, actually, and we do have to stop at midday Europe time. So there is space for one or two burning questions. There's nothing in the Q&A at the moment, but perhaps someone from the panel has a question you'd be welcome to ask. And I want to leave a minute or two for Guy, probably just to, I'd be interested to hear like the next steps for us as a project. We've gone on a journey today from the innovation hubs and from the work done on barriers and levers and transdisciplinary stuff to the science policy interface with you and Sebastian. What are the next steps? So if we can leave 1 or 2 minutes for that, especially in the context of CAP post, CAP 2028 onwards. Any questions before that from the panel or the floor? Any clarification needed? No. So yeah, Guy, is that all right? Sorry, I hadn't prepared you for that. I just think it'd be great to round up with the kind of what are the next steps from your point of view as the sort of person coordinating our policy efforts for TRANSECT.
Yes, thank you, Tim, for the invitation to finalize with some statements. So maybe I'll divide my answer to 2 parts. One is the plea for policymakers. So I'm assuming that among the listeners to this webinar, there will be both scientists and hopefully also policymakers listening to us. And I think the important issues which I wanted to highlight from all the presentations today is that the easiest way forward and the lowest hanging fruit for policymakers will be to phase out inefficient and harmful subsidies, which are obviously not functioning, and to change the way we are perceiving the income objective of our policies. So if you pay people, then they get money, and that's very useful, but then you need to ask, what are we paying for to do the right thing? So paying the right farmers to do the right thing, making sure that consumers can support that through the principles of public money for payment for public goods and polluters pay. Meaning a farmer that really decides, I want to ruin the environment, fair enough, but they don't need our support. They don't need our money to do that. And this is the current situation. So if everybody gets the money, then we're not going to get out of this situation. And this is a matter of life and death for many people that are being impacted by that, literally life and death. So we need to secure the funding for sustainability. We need to secure the path of transition because we are in a polycrisis. We have many political, economic, and environmental crisis to handle. And what we're going to be doing in the coming months will be to repeatedly try to approach policymakers with the science we've done. I would like to welcome, we will, first of all, congratulate Adrien and Stephen to already produce 2 very brilliant policy briefs. We will be producing more of these from the current results that we're producing from work package 6 of the of the project. We will be organizing additional events. So if anybody wants to organize events with us or to invite us, scientists are rarely invited to policy meetings at the national level or in Brussels. And so anybody who's interested in hearing that, please do invite us. And we will be asked to be invited, not only push by ourselves. There will be an event in Berlin, for instance, in December, and there are potential more events. And finally, what we've realized in the project and what we are currently doing is that we will enhance the work on other policies and not only the CAP. If this is going to the direction that it's currently going, then yes, we need to be concerned. We need to voice our criticism. We were happy in Brussels to learn that there are other people in Brussels that are concerned about that because this is a good starting point. We've heard criticism for 4 political parties, meaning that at least there's a room for dialogue, and we will be calling for that. But we need to also think as scientists on other directions, like investing more in nature, investing more in the nature restoration regulation, making it a success. So we will be writing also the next papers on the link between the CAP and the nature restoration regulation, and calling for a food policy, which is really essential. The Commission hasn't published it, and it seems essential that this will happen. So we have until August. We will be calling for additional activities, and there will be more results as we're finalizing the results. And finally, we will be also calling for citizen science and empowerment of both farmers and other actors, so that we are all together and trying to steer this boat to more of a safe environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Very compelling final statement. Final from me is a call to action. If this online roadshow webinar has stirred your interest, please share it. As Guy's mentioned, you could send it to colleagues. You can send it to people you might know who hold the power of policy at a member state level or at a European level. And keep following Agroecology-TRANSECT for future events. This is being recorded. You can share the recording on YouTube, and the more amplification we get, the better chance we have of having some kind of impact and our kind of mission of scaling up and scaling out agroecology. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone on our panel. Everyone's working super hard at this moment for the project. So to take the time out to prepare and to present to everyone is a big thing. So thank you, everybody, especially Carla for getting up in the middle of the night in Guadeloupe to join us. We appreciate that massively, and apologies for scheduling it in the morning in Europe time. Yes, thanks very much. Our next webinar is going to be on integrated pest and water management, which Carla talked a little bit about, and it'll be her colleagues from Guadeloupe and some other innovation hubs, perhaps even Alexandra. We have to have that discussion, and that's on the 20th of January. And if you're watching a recording of this, you can go on our website and in the event section and book free tickets to that. It's not live just yet if you're watching live, but save the date nonetheless. And obviously our policy work continues, and look out, we will share our developments with that and the new policy briefs as soon as they are finalized as we go forwards. Anna, is there anything I've forgotten from a housekeeping point of view, or we can close the meeting there?
Just to remind everyone that this will be shared as a recording, as you mentioned. And just again, thank you so much to all the speakers, because I think if we didn't manage to inspire you with this, I don't know what will.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Anna, as well, and Carla and Jane for supporting behind the scenes. And we will see you at the next Agroecology-TRANSECT webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.